People of Reddit who got divorced and then remarried the same person again. What's your story? My parents. Stepmom and dad married at a young age. 18 and 16. I guess that was okay back in the day. Had 2 kids, divorced. Dad had another child, then married my biological mother and had me. Mother died of cancer. Was just my dad and I for a few years. My oldest, half, sister was having her first child, so we visited. Obviously her mother was there as well. My dad and her rekindle their relationship. After a few years, she officially adopts me. That was 20 years ago and they are still going strong. I've known her over 2/3 of my life and she's as good as a mother that anyone could have. This one is rather sweet. I am sorry about losing your mother, though. My grandparents did. My grandfather suffered massive PTSD from serving in the Navy and would get so angry he would black out and forget what he did. He was very abusive to my mother while she was growing up. My grandmother divorced him and it was a wake-up call for my grandfather and he got the proper help he needed. After about 8 months of anger management sessions and seeing a psychologist on the regular, my grandmother got remarried to him. Also, my mother and grandfather's relationship is great now and he is a very calm individual. I've rarely ever seen him angry and when he does it's definitely not violent. My ridiculous coworker divorced her husband because he said something like "you can't live without me." She divorced him to prove a point, but then remarried him, so I guess he really proved his point. Haha, she really showed him. And wasted a lot of money and time, haha. Depends on how this built up. Without lawyers you can get divorced for $500. My parents did that. Bitter divorce, drawn out custody battle. Nightmares all around. Almost 30 years later, they got remarried and stayed that way until my mom passed away. They were married in 1964 when my mom was 16 and my dad was 21. They came from completely different backgrounds. Mom was native, grew up very poor in a rural area with alcoholic parents. Dad was a spoiled mama's boy, but had a strict German father, and both my grandparents really disliked my mom for years and years, and still loved each other enough to try again regardless of the hell they'd put each other through during the divorce. My dad and former stepdad became friends, and they hang out every night just working on cars and playing cards. So weird. We got married in our early 20s. Had a few happy years together and eventually had several problems all at once, from money to illness. Everything became tension and we ended up hating each other. I got a load of mental health problems as a result and we separated and divorced amicably. Over 3 years we would sporadically talk on social media or the phone over Christmas or birthdays, etc., but it would always end up an argument over long-standing bitterness over something. Eventually I wrote a letter saying that I couldn't talk to her again as it always turned into an emotional roller coaster and it wasn't healthy. I admitted a load of stuff and at the same time got off my chest what I thought of her at the time, and we stopped contact. Another few years later she messaged me on Facebook about something to do with a mutual friend. We got chatting and agreed to meet up for a drink. Everything went well, and we saw each other more often and eventually we started a relationship. During that time talked over those old issues and we both realized that we had matured and had been improved in the areas we previously struggled with due in part to the divorce and also that we were now that much more emotionally mature. We went away on holiday and in secret got remarried at Gretna Green, with 2 shopkeepers as our witnesses. 7 years later, we live an increasingly self-sustainable life with allotments, 2 dogs, chickens and have done lots of life laundry to work less and spend as much time as possible together. I'm a full-time mature student, and she has various part-time casual jobs in her field. The less money we have, the happier we have become. We always knew we should be together, I think, it was just a matter of timing and maturity. Edit for spelling. Edit. Wow, thanks for all the positive comments and everything folks, I feel quite humbled by it all. I'll update this at some point with answers to some of the questions etc. when I have more time. I had no idea it would be interesting to people but glad to hear our experience is helpful. Not me but my parents. They married and had me at a young age. They were very different people in every way, nothing in common. My mom had depression issues. They divorced for a brief period when I was really young but I don't ever recall knowing they were actually divorced. I never prodded why but my understanding was it just difficult so they split but realized pretty quickly they wanted to work it out. They got back together although they didn't officially remarry for years. I was 8 and they said we're getting remarried. And that was the first time I found out they were actually divorced lol. Been together 36 years now. My grandpa married my grandma. Then he divorced her and married another woman. Then he divorced that woman and remarried my grandma. Then he divorced my grandma and remarried the second woman again. I'm sorry, but this one made me lol. My parents were married for 7 years, then got divorced when I was 5. They fought all the time, so when they announced to me that they were getting remarried when I was 11, I was terrified. They were then married for 2 years and had another child together during that time, and then proceeded to get divorced again. I recently found out the marriage happened only out of guilt and not real love. All throughout growing up I heard each of their sides of the story until finally I told both of them to never talk to me about each other again. After years of carrying that anger and resentment, I decided I wasn't going to make the same mistake my parents did, and I will only marry someone if I truly love them. My sister went the opposite route and refuses to marry because it doesn't mean anything to her. My dad and my stepmom divorced when I was 14, 1994. They went a few years where they barely spoke to each other, except when Dad picked up my half-brother and half-sister. My brother did most of the home maintenance and landscaping around the house until he graduated from high school. After my brother went to college, my dad started cutting the grass for her and doing the home repairs she couldn't do. They soon started going to dinner together once in a while. Then they started hanging out and watching TV together, and sometimes it would get late and Dad would sleep on the couch. After my sister went to college, he started staying over more and more often, and we'd celebrate holidays together again. Whenever they'd have an argument, he'd just go back to his house and give her time to simmer down. This went on for years. Finally, after being divorced for over 20 years, they decided it was stupid to have two separate houses, so they officially got back together and bought a new house. They keep separate bedrooms, Dad downstairs, stepmom upstairs, so if they have an argument, they can get away and let things cool off. They remind me of a line from a Genesis song, "We cannot live together and we cannot live apart." That's the situation, and I've known it from the start. My mom finally divorced my dad when 3 of the 4 of us had moved out, and my youngest sibling, in high school at the time, was mature enough, in my mom's correct estimation, to handle the split. She reconnected with a childhood friend, fell in love, and married him. Turns out he was off the deep end, emotionally abused her for years, then killed himself. My dad had always wanted my mom back, and they basically remarried for necessary financial and healthcare reasons. Neither are happy with it, but at least they're familiar with each other. My cousin divorced her second husband because she, my cousin, was possibly beating his daughter. 6 months later they got remarried and then got divorced a year later because she was cheating on him, which was the reason her first husband divorced her. She's married again now to a very wealthy trust fund baby and has so far managed to either not cheat or not get caught. That checkbook is apparently the only thing that keeps her pants on. If I sound salty, it's because she constantly likes to say the gays ruin the sanctity of marriage, even though she's had 3 divorced and was a big portion in 2 other divorces. I'm 30, gay as hell, and have never cheated on a single boyfriend. So take that, Brooke, you ducking cunt. My grandparents had 6 kids. When my grandmother was pregnant with my mom, my grandfather left my prego grandma for another woman. My grandma ended up eventually remarrying a wonderful man. He raised my mom and her siblings, we'll call him Granddad. But my grandma was damaged and never really bonded with my mother. They have always had a cold relationship, unlike the rest of her siblings. My grandfather ended up having 6 kids with the other woman. Then after 16 years no contact, my grandfather came back. With no warning to my mom, my grandmother promptly divorced Granddad and remarried my grandfather. They stayed together till his death just about a decade ago. My grandfather's other children ended up scattered across the foster care system. Their mother abandoned them after my grandfather left. The whole thing was quite horrible actually. My granddad remarried a really nice lady and they are still together. My mom still calls him Dad and he is an active member of the family. Granddad and my grandmother get along, but yeah, weird. My fiance's mom is on her 4th marriage, to her 3rd person. This guy was her second husband, my fiance's dad was her 3rd, and then she left him to remarry the second guy after almost 40 years. It's totally weird. Edit, to be absolutely clear, husband 1, a husband 2, B husband 3, C, my in-laws, husband 4, B, again. Jesus Christ, dude. Will you make a PowerPoint or something? I think you just gave Reddit a stroke. Will you take an animated GIF? My parents did this. Married, had my brother a year later, me too after that. They divorced when I was 6 months old. She remarried to an alcoholic, abusive, drug-addled piece of shit and did a great job at convincing us not to tell Dad. Dad moved back in when I was 8. It was ducking Christmas every day. The best. When I was 17 she was supposed to be on a business trip to Montreal. I found the confirmation for her hotel stay at a ski resort and elsewhere and gave it to my dad. She'd been having an affair. Moved out shortly after. Haven't seen her in a decade and my life is so much less stressful. Duck her. Wow, that was a roller coaster. How is your dad these days? And you and your siblings? This would be my parents. They divorced when I was 12 and got back together when I was 14. 10 years later they are still together and they act like nothing never happened. In fact, I'm still not really quite sure what the hell that was all about. Interesting. The first one I've read where they seemed happy before and happy after. Every other story there is some big change in one of the partners that makes the second marriage work, or else the second marriage appears to have the same problems as the first. My parents never loved each other, constant intense fights, finally got divorced when I was 13. Dad bought a house, furnished it, but never moved in. Without showing any affection or explaining anything to me and my younger siblings, they remarried. Then they divorced again when I was 17. Also, they were very against therapy, which we all could have really benefited from. We're all ducked up now. So if you're a parent and you're denying your child mental health treatment or ignoring their need for it, don't be surprised when they grow up and go no contact with you. Emotional neglect and abuse is real, and damages every aspect of a person's life for a very long time, possibly forever. Even with treatment later in life. Also, some people just shouldn't be parents. Not everyone is physically/financially/emotionally well suited for it. Having children is a choice. Children are not an extension of yourself, they are not your therapist or best friend, and having them doesn't fix relationships. Seriously. My wife divorced me after we had been together 4 years, citing lack of attention, sex, understanding, etc. She also had issues with alcohol, self-esteem, and severe depression stemming from her childhood. I was a full-time pre-med student with 2 part-time jobs. She dated around for a little less than a year then told me that she wanted me back. She's seeing a psychiatrist to try and find a medication that works for her and only drinks on special occasions. I'm down to 1 full-time job in my last year in undergrad. I've also learned to try and take more time just for her. Learn to avoid living only to work, schedule dates, and just hang out with her more often. Hopefully everything continues to be smooth sailing because I love that woman more than life itself. My parents divorced when I was like 4, and my mom remarried. They divorced when I was 12. When I was about 20 my parents got remarried to each other, for practical purposes which I don't entirely understand, but it has to do with my dad's really good free healthcare and my mom didn't have any, but mostly because my brother is disabled and if one of them died it would be easier for my brother to be taken care of if they had been married. I'm not sure of the details and I didn't approve of the marriage. It was only supposed to be on paper but somehow 15 years later they live together and have separate bedrooms and snipe at each other all the time. I guess I'm glad that they're taking care of each other, and they're not romantically involved but they both seem fine with the situation and it works, financially. They're both retired and just hang out watching TV in different rooms lol. My ex's parents did this. The father could never hold down a job, would either get let go or just leave it because he didn't like it every few months whilst the mother was working her ass off trying to set up her own baking business completely off her own back whilst he spent most of their money on booze nightly. Before she started her business they both worked in a store and he started having an affair with the manager right under his wife's nose. Everyone apparently knew about it but her. He also cheated on her many times. Bummed around, eventually she'd throw him out to his sisters, who also never worked a day in her life but would boast about all the latest gadgets the government paid for, or she'd have him sleep on their couch. They broke up, I can't remember if they actually fully divorced or just became estranged, and then a few years ago remarried. Then he did it all over again. Their grandmother got really sick and put into hospital. He slept with the nurse. He really is a piece of shit guy with the gift of the gab. Could talk his way out of anything. The mother would sometimes reminisce with me over an old boyfriend she had when she was younger and how it didn't work out. She made it sound like that guy was her soulmate. Watching her forgive her husband over and over again as she brought in the money working her ass off, it was terrible. She's an incredible woman. Remarrying fixed nothing but she knew that anyway. Turns out the ex was showing so many similarities to his father that I jumped ship before it got to that. His mother even told me after our breakup. I completely understand why. I love her still and hope she finds happiness. My mother and father divorced when I was 6. Dad used to abuse us, both physically and emotionally, and my mom got a bit of it as well. She told him that if he were to do something despicable again, she would divorce him immediately. This is after all the shit we as a family had to deal with. He immediately cheated on her, and it ended with said divorce. My dad moved an hour away, leaving my mom to work 3 jobs and use food stamps just to afford to feed 3 children and herself, while my dad, who happened to be the breadwinner, was living comfortably. My dad fell into a deep depression, because he knew he screwed up, but decided to keep going, knowing that if he were to fix himself and become a better man, he could have another chance to be a true father and husband. While visiting him, we 3, my older sis, younger bro, and I, could see how he was improving, slowly but surely. For 2 years he tried improving his life and his relationship toward his family, with the end goal he would remarry his wife, the true love of his life, as he told me. He stopped seeing other women after a few months after the divorce, he quit drinking, he quit watching violent TV, he was trying his best to be kind. Overall he was becoming better. At the halfway point in their divorce was for 2 years, so this is a year into the divorce, my mom and dad started talking again. My dad tried to convince her he was becoming a better man, and that if she took him back in, he would how much he had improved. She declined and said a little more time would be a better idea. The following day, he locked himself in his closet and put a gun in his mouth, about to pull the trigger before he eventually broke down and sobbed for hours. My mom has told me for years after, that she knew he was about to commit suicide, even though they were miles from each other. Dad also confirmed his near suicide. This was the starting point of their bonding. My dad continued trying to get better, and eventually moved into the house next to my mom's. It was rented out by a great guy who became close friends with both my mom and my dad during their divorce, when he felt he was much more emotionally stable. My mom began seeing his improvement, and we kids got to see him a lot more. After another year, my dad eventually proposed to my mom again. I don't know the details, since I haven't asked, nor do I want to, since it's a bit personal for them. But they truly felt in love again, as their bond was restored after all this time. Since remarrying, my dad has become a fantastic person, and mom, although frustrated with him sometimes, still loves him a lot. We've improved a lot since then as a family. My dad remembers the man he once was, but he doesn't like to think that was him before he changed for the better. He thinks the second marriage is his true marriage to my mom. They've been remarried for 13 years and counting. I'm 19 currently. Thanks for listening to another episode of Reddit X. Subscribe and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any stories. Feel free to share your own stories below in the comments. Have a good day.